Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Peter Wolfgang. I am the president of Family Institute of Connecticut Action, and I am here to testify against 5898, the assisted suicide bill, for the fifth time in 7 years. And because of that, because it's the fifth time in 7 years, instead of just reading my testimony, what I want to do instead is follow up on some of what you just heard from Stephen about how these bills get expanded. So for instance, just since our last hearing on this in 2018, this goes to the slippery slope, the foot in the door argument, whatever you want to call it. In Delaware, there was a bill that would have allowed people with intellectual, this was last year, a bill that would have allowed people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to access the drugs. And now just in 2019, and it's only March, Minnesota and New York. This was it was the most significant expansion of bills that we've ever seen on this. Minnesota and New York, no residency requirement. Minnesota and New Mexico, non-physicians can diagnose and prescribe. Oregon and Minnesota, elimination of waiting periods so the patient can receive the drugs almost immediately. New Mexico, the original bills allowed consultation by telemedicine and defined terminal illness as in the foreseeable future. A number of bills had no requirement that the patient be seen in person. And then there were the Oregon expansion bills. Representative Candelora referenced one of these. That terminal illness will now mean a disease that will produce or substantially contribute to a patient's death. Think about that. That doesn't mean that the patient is dying. It doesn't mean that the disease is incurable or irreversible. It doesn't mean that the patient has a short time to live. It doesn't mean that the particular disease will eventually cause death. It only means that it is expected to contribute to a patient's death in days, months, years, or decades. Now, I know that we're here talking about a bill that supposedly, and by your definition, this is not assisted suicide. To us, that's Orwellian, but that a bill that only allows you to commit assisted suicide if you are diagnosed as having 6 months or less to live and you're mentally competent. We ought to be able to take advantage of the fact that we've been hearing this bill almost every year since 2013, and that these things I just mentioned have happened in the other states where this has already become law. We ought to be the beneficiary of that knowledge, because there are folks coming up here from the other side saying, well, this is very moderate, we have all these safeguards, but you can see in other states where the mask has already come off. And I draw your attention to what Stephen said, quoting the Compassionate Choices president when she was here in 2014 in favor of allowing it for those with mental disabilities as well. To summarize, 2 points. A testimony before me, Representative Cheeseman, focused in on what she said about the American Medical Association, the fact that they did an exhaustive 2-year study on this. Connecticut did not. And a testimony coming after me, Margaret Dorr. Pay very close attention to what she has to say about abuse. That falsification of the death certificate, very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? Representative Candelora.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted you to speak to that, the death certificate, if you could, because you've been around here a lot for it, and it doesn't seem we have the advantage of the state's attorney's office here. What are some of the issues for that?
So it was very interesting that this came up actually when the head of Compassionate Choices was testifying, and she addressed the issue only in terms of what it has to do with medical research. But as you mentioned, Representative Candelora, the opposition to this comes from the Chief State's Attorney's Office. They submitted testimony in 2015 against that bill. I think they will be doing that again this year, although they did not have it ready in time for this hearing. But their concerns is that this greatly affects the ability to conduct murder investigations. And you know, this goes to some things you're going to hear from other speakers throughout the day, and some you've already heard about, in terms of how this bill is structured. When you have a couple witnesses there, when you request from the doctor the right to have the prescription to take your own life, but you don't need witnesses when you actually take the drugs. I think you spoke to this earlier today, that it doesn't have to be public, it can be private. I think it's defined as you ingest the drugs. We don't know that the person really did it voluntarily. These are the things that I know concern the state chief attorney's office. This is, I would recommend the testimony. In fact, if you wait a moment, I can give you the number right now. and you can look it up on the Connecticut General Assembly's website, because I had it here in my notes. Okay, the 2015 bill was 7015. If you go to that bill on the Connecticut General Assembly's website for the year 2015, I encourage all of you to read the Chief State's Attorney's testimony on the falsification of the death certificate. I think, and look, you heard it from, I think Representative Cook said that she was sympathetic to the underlying cause here, the underlying concept of the bill, what its proponents would call death with dignity, aid in dying, but she was concerned about this particular bill. I think that is why this bill dies every year. I think that was what most concerned the Chief State's Attorney. You know, Chief State's Attorney doesn't have an opinion on assisted suicide one way or the other. Their concern was that death certificate, the way the genie that Bill let out of the bottle in terms of being able to do proper investigations of potential murders. And of course, the Chief State's Attorney could speak to it better than I could. But these are all the, I would encourage you, I could give you the numbers of all the bills right now. In 2013, the bill was 6645. In 2014, the bill was 5326. In 2017, the bill was 7015. And I think in 2018, it was 5417. Those were the 4 previous years in which this bill got a public hearing. I strongly encourage you to reread all that testimony as well as this year's. All the arguments, and Stephen's right, those arguments really haven't been taken into consideration because the bill you have this year is almost exactly the same bill. But I would encourage you to go back and reread all that testimony in addition to this year's testimony, and then I would add to it the things I've already talked about. The folks from the other side who are up here are going to tell you this is only 6 months are left to live, mentally sound. That was the tune they were singing in 2013. Look at what their friends in other states are doing, where they already accomplished this in other states, and then they moved on to the next thing. That is the path you're putting us on. If you legalize assisted suicide, please don't do it.
Thank you.
Representative Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The argument that laws will change. When we have to make laws, considering what's going to happen later is only a consideration. All laws eventually do change. That, to me, is a fear of what you want the fear to be. And I'm struggling to be able to take that argument just to say because a law may change that we should not consider a law in front of us. No laws would be passed. And I just want to make that point, and it, to me, is kind of a side road we shouldn't be taking.
Except Representative Arnott, I'm not talking about hypothetical fears. I'm stating actual facts. I am describing to you bills that have now come up in the other states that are far ahead of us on this that have already legalized assisted suicide. There's nothing preventing you from looking at these other states that are ahead of you at the way they've tried to open this further and ask yourself, is this really the path we should go on? The fact that laws change isn't a reason not to consider all the evidence.
So in that too, we have over 5,000 bills that are thrown out here every session also. Some make it, some don't. So if you can email me the ones that have actually changed, I'd like to see that. Thank you.